Let's turn to the interesting question here in Europe right now, which is, when on earth is inflation going to peak? At the moment, there's very little evidence of that happening. Take a look at what is happening across Europe. This was kind of the story at the back end of last week. We've got Spain, we've got Germany, we've got France, we've got Italy. Spain was the outlier because everybody else saw inflation expectations easily being beaten with the latest print. That then comes cumulatively together with the euro area number. We get a 10.7 print, the headline number. The markets, the economy. Let's talk about the economists. The economists were anticipating that we would get 10.3. So we continue basically to see this move sharply to the upside on Eurozone inflation. The staff projections out of the ECB keep being confounded. They keep being wrong. They keep being they keep underestimating the inflation print, and that has an impact in terms of how quickly it's going to roll over. There's also evidence as well. Take a look at the labour market negotiations that are starting. Take a look at what's happening with IG Metall. There is a growing picture of maybe this starting to spread out into the labour market as well. Melanie Debono joining us now, Pantheon Macroeconomics. She's a senior European economist joining us now to discuss this. Melanie, how big a problem does the ECB have with this print today? What does it tell us about what it needs to do next?
Well, I mean, these inflation data are a proper Halloween nightmare for the ECB. Energy inflation rose again, the food rate rose again, the core rate was up again. It's basically just all tricks and no treats in these data. The numbers make an ECB pivot to 50 basis points hikes from the 275 basis point hikes that we saw in July and September. Less likely, but some of us are not giving up, and that includes us at Pantheon Macroeconomics, because we doubt today's print will have been enough to have convinced the ECB, which only last week said that they've made substantial progress in hiking rates, to have changed their minds on that, especially since we've got the November reading to come before they meet again in December.
But Melanie, on the flip side, GDP in the third quarter slowed to 0.2%. That doesn't feel like an economy that can handle another 75 basis point hike.
At this point, the inflation rate is too high for the ECB to probably be thinking about about slowing activity. They did mention that last week when they met. You know, all signs point to a slowdown. We've got surveys falling across the board, but they can't really be dealing with that at the same time as trying to deal with the inflation mandate. Their aim is to get inflation down to 2%, and they need to hike more to do that.
Melanie, up until now, the European inflation picture has felt like it's been a supply-side story. Are we going to see that, though, changing? I'm starting to see the labour market negotiations in Germany becoming interesting. IG Metall, the metal workers, they want 8%, and they're being fairly pushy. How big a problem, again, is this going to be?
So wage negotiations, like the one you mentioned in Germany, they are coming to a head now. How much workers have in terms of negotiating power, it's a mixed bag across the Eurozone. We will see some increases in wages because in certain countries, such as in Spain and in Italy, for example, there's wage indexation comes into play. So wages next year will rise by whatever inflation was this year, which of course was very high. Whether or not that leads into a wage price spiral, it's a risk for next year. It's not a risk for this year and the last 2 months that we have in the year. But it's not in our baseline at the moment. So we do not see this wage price spiral that the ECB has been warning about.
So the ECB could effectively do something about a wage price spiral, but they can't really do anything about the inflation that's there. If you break apart some of the inflation data in the core in particular, is there high prices that the ECB can actually combat versus that like energy, which they have no control over?
So you are right that they cannot really deal with energy prices. They have to take them as they are. We are seeing signs that there is rolling over. And we've got base effects from last year, and the sharp drop in gas prices in recent months should eventually feed into the energy rate. Of course, there's problems with the lags and country-specific information, which means that perhaps the energy rate will continue to sort of only gradually edge down. But there are things that they can attack, yes. So, for example, the services rate, that is predominantly led by the demand side. So once we do see demand rolling over, because as we are seeing, the economy is slowing down and consumers are tightening their belts to be able to deal with higher energy bills, we should see those rates slowly come down because firms will eventually stop increasing prices as quickly as they are now.
Melanie, Christine Lagarde has come under pressure for saying that this inflation came out of nowhere. Clearly didn't come out of nowhere. Do you think the ECB and the staff have got a handle on what is happening here? Because inflation keeps exceeding expectations by some margin.
I think we have to give the ECB somewhat of a break because a lot of us have got it wrong. So the inflation numbers, especially for energy, have continued to surprise us. And that is because as I mentioned, the lag that comes in different countries and because of fiscal policy being different across the board. So, for example, the Italian number that we previously mentioned as well, the inflation rate jumped there. And that's because of a 59% increase in bills that households are about to see now in October. Whereas then you've got countries like Spain, where we saw inflation come down sharply. And that was because the government there has introduced a fuel subsidy and they're working on cutting and capping electricity prices. So the ECB is having to deal with all these different nuances across countries, which make that its job that much more hard when it comes to dealing with inflation, or all of our jobs very hard when we're forecasting.
Yeah, no kidding. And at the same time, you have to take into account what measures we're going to see from the government, too, to help offset all of that. When do we hit a recession?
Well, the data this morning surprised us to the upside. We thought we were already in a recession because the survey data have been so downbeat that we were expecting that the Q3 number was going to be a lot worse than it actually was, despite it having been a slowdown from Q2. As things stand, the economy expanded, and that's because of tourism having supported a number of the more tourism-dependent countries, such as and there's some ideas that there was in Italy, for example, came in much stronger than we thought. But we still think that growth is slowing, and we still think that the Eurozone is headed for a recession. It will just come in a quarter later than we previously thought.